Good afternoon, colleagues. Please be seated. The security panel meeting has begun. Have you noticed that we originally had slated 3 items for discussion, and yesterday Andrew WAN had raised to me and to the secretary, and due to time issue, we're not able to complete drafting the private members bill. That he decided to withdraw his private members bill item when we were notified and understand his decision. So today we only have 2 items today. And 1 information papers issued since the last meeting. There are a total of 4 papers. And we have already referred them to government for follow-up and responses. And second item, date of next meeting item for discussion. And please look at the list of items for discussion and list follow-up items. And for the July meeting, we have 3 items. 1, the private members bill by Mr. Kenneth Leung. The second item, and the drug situation in Hong Kong 2019. And the government's introduction of voyeurism and non-consensual upskirt photography offenses. So that's a legislative proposal that was supposed to be discussed on the last July meeting. While due to social events, the meeting was cancelled, and it was now postponed till our next meeting in July. Any issues, Mr. LAM Cheuk-ting? Just now you mentioned that for the items for the July meeting, I already written to see if we can call for a special meeting to discuss on the IPCC report, where we had a chance to discuss with the IPCC and the police management. Chairman, as you know, for most part of the year, that the various social conflict and the issue of police brutality has quite severe, which is unprecedented. The security panel should attach great importance to this report, and we should allow the panel members to seek clarification from IPCC and the police for follow-up. I wonder if we can call for a special meeting to discuss this item. And second, Chairman, I also noticed that police has set up an integrity review panel, which is headed by the Deputy Commissioner, Mr. KWOK Ka-ki, had introduced and mentioned that the top 7 police management or the commissioner will take the drug test personally and urge other police officers to do the same. I'm quite worried that the drug situation and the police force had the higher out worry than the call for the mandatory drug testing. I wonder that we can discuss on the work of the Police Integrity Review Manual as well on the police officers' conduct. As quite recently, there are quite a few police officers arrested for serious offenses, and police conduct is a great social concern. Let's see if we can call for a special meeting to discuss these 2 items together. I saw Ms. Elsbeck put up her hand. Well, I suppose we can also discuss the unrest in the U.S. to see how the Hong Kong police can learn from the U.S. police handling. What can we learn from them? Well, we should discuss it together as well. The views of the 2 colleagues have been duly noted, and after the meeting, we will discuss it with the Vice Chairman and the government officials. Well, the third item, the strengthening and prevention and tackling of terrorist activities. We invite the administration team into the room, please. I expect that members will be enthusiastic in putting up questions. Okay, let's press the button. 17, 18 members, 19 members have pressed the button. Let me read out the list. Howard Cheung, Poon Siu Ping, Alice Mac, Claudia Mo, Chen Chen Ying, Kenneth Leung, Chen Chung Cha, Yu Si Wing, Lok Chung Hong, Martin Liao, Jimmy Hon KWOK Ka-ki, Dr Hon KWOK Ka-ki, Shiu Ka-chun, LAM Cheuk-ting, Wu-chi White, Elizabeth Quad. We have quite a great team today. Today we have the Secretary, Mr. John Lee, and Principal Assistant Secretary, Ms. Jenny Chan. And for the Police Force, Deputy Commissioner of Operations, Mr. Shu Chak-yi, and Senior Superintendent, Mr. Chu Man-long. Correction Service Department, Ms. Betty Chen Kai, Assistant Commissioner. And Customs Excise Department, Assistant Commissioner, Mr. Chen Si-ted. And Fire Services, Mr. Terence Ching, Assistant Director Headquarters, and Government Flying Service, Mr. James C. Wing, and Immigration Department, Assistant Director, Mr. Fan Hugh Singh. Before we open for the questions, and can the Secretary walk us through the paper? And since last year, there are dozens or so bombs and firearms related cases. And earlier last month, at an old zoo campus, we found all the traces of explosive. It shows that the signs of breeding of local terrorism in Hong Kong. First, the different types of explosives seized by the police were commonly used overseas terrorist attack, including the London Underground and bus serial bombing, a Erewhon Shrine bombing in Bangkok, and the Sri Lanka churches and hotel serial bombing, which causing severe casualties. Second, the perpetrators use the similar detonation methods used in overseas. For example, the police seized a bomb made of pressure cooker and nails. The same kind of pressure cooker bomb was used by terrorists in the marathon bombing in Boston in U.S. in 2013, causing 3 deaths and 264 injuries. The police seized a detonating device made of, and also the pipe bomb seized were similarly used in overseas terrorist attacks. And thirdly, the police have multiple occasions have seized extremely toxic and highly flammable chemicals, including potassium nitrate, ammonium nitrate, sulfuric acid, sulfur, acetone, and so on. If these materials are used for launching attacks, they will cause severe injuries and deaths. Besides explosives, in the police enforcement only sees 5 genuine guns and large quantity of bullets, including a semi-automatic rifle, the same kind of rifle used in the mass shooting on a crowd of concert goers in Las Vegas, causing 50 deaths and 500 or more injuries. Bombs are indiscriminate, and there were no escape when a bomb set off, and buildings will also be destroyed. The public should not be mistaken that they will be immune. It takes everyone to counter terrorism. We have to say no to this behavior. Also, provide their own safety. Also, work with the law enforcement agencies. The Hong Kong government will crack down on terrorism with the most stringent law. With enough evidence, the police and the DOJ will consider invoking the United Nations Anti-Terrorism Measures Ordinance to conduct prosecutions and also consider freezing the relevant assets. The Hong Kong Police Force is a highly efficient law enforcement force, as demonstrated in a successful dissolution of a high dozen or so extremist acts. In 2018, we've set an interdepartmental counterterrorism unit. And all the departments have a rep here today. The ICTU and the existing CT framework have set a cross-departmental framework to strengthen the various department collaboration and coordination to holistically enhance our counterterrorism capability. And in response to the seizures of explosive and firearms, the government departments had already enhanced their CT awareness and step of intelligence gathering. The government has closely kept this in view and will not rule out in raising the level of terrorist threat level. In case of terrorist attack or raising the threat level, the police will close off sensitive locations and high-profile patrol and search functions and conduct the security checks. The government should work with the Air Force to protect their own safety. The various departments will also conduct public education, including through drills and education to enhance the counterterrorism awareness. And now we have Horace Chung, 3 minutes per round. Thank you, Chairman. Of course, DAB and myself support the police to rigorously crack down on terrorist activity, especially for the year of Black Rise. We have exposed crimes of local terrorism, including assassination of the Dragon Slayer team attempt to assassinate government officials and police. The terrorism also resort to the bombs, which may happen here. For example, the explosion on the Matilda Hospital bathroom case, and also the explosion on the Israel platform, and also the bomb cases detected by the police, and also the raw materials that could be turned into bombs. So, Chairman, while the terrorists also frequently resort to bombs, the public is quite concerned that the investigation of a few bomb cases, explosive case, for example, the explosion at Matilda Hospital, the Israel platform case, and also the phone control bomb near Walian College, as also the St. Joseph Secondary School ex-campus where explosive had been found. For all these cases, what are the progress? Have you identified the suspects, and are these cases are terrorism related? Secretary. Well, in our police records, we have more than 10 explosive cases, and in these cases, the police have made over 70 arrests. And for the investigation beginning in full swing, as we, well, the explosive, for example, we need to test and analyze. In this case, we would resort to all effective methods and legal statutes. From what we can see, under Hong Kong existing law for the terrorism acts, we can freeze the assets of those involved. Thus, we hope to work on this so that would eliminate the chance for terrorism to take root in Hong Kong. And while each case have their own progress, thus I will not able to go into details. Well, gathering intelligence is the key. Thus, in this dozen or so cases, we were able to stop these bomb cases preemptively. On 3 of those cases, that the suspects, besides intending to use explosives, they also attempt to compel the government to change the policy, as also for the purpose or for their own political cause. Well, these 3 aspects have fulfilled the definition of terrorism. For evidence gathering, we'll continue to work on it. With sufficient evidence, we will conduct a prosecution accordingly.
Mr. Poon Siu-ping, thank you, Chairman. We are grateful for the government and the police for undertaking CT work. The Secretary said that over the past period, there have been 10 cases or so of explosive being raided. Now the terrorist threat level is now moderate, and I would like to find out international community's standard for setting terrorist threat level. Are we on a par with them? And your paper also said, and also as pointed out by the Secretary in paragraph 10, in 2018, you set up the ICTU, and it has collaborated with relevant government departments to set up a CT intelligence exchange mechanism and workflow platform. Are they undertaking regular work? How many people are involved? Does it mean that different departments will have their own work portfolio? And in paragraph 11, you said that since April this year, the ICTU has conducted a lot of training or briefings on many occasions for relevant industry stakeholders to enhance their awareness on the prevention and response against suspicious objects and bombs. What are the industries being involved. Have you set up a mechanism with them whereby if they know that there are people who purchase a large a quantity of explosive materials and they're required to notify their employers? You also mentioned that in relation to the run, hide and report for the public, I would like to know whether other countries are also adopting the similar strategy, and that is run, hide and report. Secretary, let me first take the first and third questions, and then I would ask the Senior Superintendent of the ICTU to talk about his work. Now, right now, our terrorist threat level is moderate. Our stand is similar to that in other countries overseas. There are 3 threat levels, and we try to make it comprehensible to the public so that the public know exactly what level we are at, and that is important. And in setting the threat level, we take into account a number of factors, whether we have the intelligence and the reliability of the intelligence, and if the intelligence that there is a terrorist attack, which are the groups, and whether we have the capability and arrangements to neutralize them, and whether we are confident of doing that, and also the environment surrounding us, Hong Kong. And also we also look at the intelligence online as well. That is our consideration. And after all the questions have been asked, I will ask the relevant department to supplement, because we've got 19 members on the queue. Miss Alice Mack. For countering terrorism, different countries have their own mechanism, especially in intelligence gathering work. Your paper says that we have the ICTU. Does the ICTU have the sufficient capability and manpower to collect intelligence? Without enough intelligence, it is difficult to deal with large-scale terrorist attacks. Second question is about funding. According to the UNATMO, the Secretary is empowered to freeze the assets of the terrorists. If they don't have the money, then the terrorists will not be able to operate in Hong Kong. They need money to buy firearms. People may see that we're trying to crack down on certain acts. We try to seize explosives and so on. Now, in terms of countering money laundering and also dealing with unknown source of capital flowing into Hong Kong, what work have you done? If you have to freeze the assets of these people, are we capable of collecting enough evidence? Secretary, let me first talk about funding. I am sure that a lot of people are concerned about it. We believe that there is indeed funding which has been actually provided to the different violent acts. And from the results, we can see that this is the case. In many violent acts, we see that there are a lot of helmets, goggles, and other firearms and weapons being provided. And then there are also umbrellas, which are being supplied as well. And at some stage, well, the resources are so rich that these were left abandoned after the violent acts. And maybe the funding has been reduced a bit, and we have been effective in cracking down on violent acts. So in recent violent acts, we've seen that such equipment or resources have been reduced a bit. So we don't see any abandoned weapons on the streets anymore after the violent acts. So we attach a lot of importance on cutting off the funding. The police have successfully arrested people in several cases who are suspected of money laundering. These are the targets of our crackdown efforts. If we collect sufficient evidence to show that the terrorists acts have been funded by certain groups, we would certainly go after them, the relevant people. Ms. Claudia Mo, it's very regrettable that this Carrie Lam government has gone bankrupt in terms of the people's faith in her government. The Secretary Bureau says that there is pressure cookers, nails, and on the 8th of December, you displayed the genuine guns that you have seized, which were meant for shooting policemen during the protests. But people think that you are only presenting one side of the story. You said many times that if you have sufficient evidence, then you would say that these are the supplies provided by the terrorist attacks. You even refer to the umbrellas. Well, umbrellas are minor items only. Secretary, can you present more evidence? Maybe you can invite media organizations along and present all the evidence to show that your suspicion is substantiated. So that's question one. Number two, do you think the Yulong incident on the 21st of July can be categorized as local terrorist act? Secretary, I object to Ms. Claudia Mo playing down on violent acts. I think she is giving the wrong message to the society. I'm not playing down violence. The July 21st incident is very scary. Since there were so many violent incidents and people don't feel that Hong Kong is a safe city to live in, well, let's not tone down such violent acts. This is wrong. So if we go down the route of mutual destruction, the Hong Kong society is doomed. Now, Ms. Claudia Mo referred to certain really exhibits. Actually, we show these at the press conference. We also arrested people. They appeared in court, and you can see all the exhibits when the case was presented in the court. So can I defer to the police to talk about these cases and who they have arrested and what exhibits have been involved? Do you think the July 21st incident is a local terrorist act? Mr. Sewell, please. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I disagree with Ms. Mo's remarks. She is trying to play down the cases. In fact, for cases involving explosives and firearms, there are groups behind the scene. There are 14 cases involving explosives and 4 cases involving firearms. And we arrested a total of 76 people. And additionally, 30 people have been prosecuted, and the crimes included making explosives, endangering lives and properties, possession and making of explosives, with a shooting for serious wounding, and unlawful possession of bullets and explosives. In 18 of these cases, at least 7 radical groups locally were involved. We would not take all these cases lightly. Let me share an experience here. 10 years ago, I served as a commander in the airport police district, and I was hoping to enhance the awareness of the visitors and our staff at the airport towards terrorist attacks. Once I had the opportunity to talk to an overseas security staff from another country. In that other country, any suspicious object in an airport would be reported on by a member of the public within 2 minutes. So I asked him, how could we enhance the awareness? Well, he is not answering my question. I was asking whether the July 21st incident was considered as a local terrorist attack. Mr. Siu, I asked them how we can enhance their awareness. He told me through painful experience. I hope that you would not play down such incidents. Well, he keeps saying that I am watering down or playing down the incidents. I didn't say so. Mr. Ronick Chan. Thank you, Chairman. In paragraph 2, it sets out clear definition on the terrorist act, and that is act which have the effect of causing serious violence against a person, causing serious damage to property, endangering a person's life, etc. But seems to be no definition of terrorist groups. I think we should abide by the international standards. In Minnesota, a black male was killed by a policeman kneeling on his neck, and there were several consecutive days of riots. And on the 31st of May, Donald Trump listed Anti-TAF as a terrorist group. So can the Secretary explain to me, can we model after the U.S. practice, and that is after the riots and violence, we could designate a certain group as a terrorist group? Do we have the mechanism to do that? And in paragraph 11, it says that there is the ICTU comprising 6 government departments. It is responsible for promoting awareness and education among the public towards CT, so that people are made aware of explosives, and posters have been issued. Now, apart from such leaflets and videos, does the ICTU cooperate with the EDB to promote CT on campus, especially among the secondary school students, so that they know about the danger of explosives? If they participate in producing these explosives, they are criminally liable. Has the government done something like that? Secretary, I thank you for raising the idea of doing CT education work on campus. We will consider it. Through the juniors police corps, we do have liaison with the campus, but I thank the opinion for doing this more. Now, as to the definition of terrorist groups in our law, is that if the UN designates a group as a terrorist group, then we can gazette the same here in Hong Kong. So the terror groups designated by the UN, they would definitely or immediately become a terrorist group in Hong Kong. And if the government believes that it is a terrorist group, the CE can apply to the court for it to be designated a terrorist group. So that's the second method. If we don't designate this group as a terrorist group, doesn't mean that its behavior is not terrorism attack or acts. If we have reason to believe that the certain behavior of a group or individual is a terrorist act, then I can invoke the powers conferred to me on the UNATMO to freeze those assets and stop them from recruiting members. So this is what we can do under the UNATMO. These are the 3 approaches we can adopt in dealing with the terrorist individuals and terrorist groups.
Kent Leung. So, Secretary, the UN Security Council on this April had written to the Foreign Ministry of China and pointed out that the anti-terrorism laws, which is the United Nations Anti-Terrorism Measures Ordinance, CAP 575, UNATMO, its definition of terrorism is different from the United Nations Bill of Rights. And for CAP 595, the definition of terrorism, which including a serious violent damage to property, but failed to provide any exemption. Let's say for a protest and procession, which may lead to property damage, should be exempted under this definition. So that's the views of the UN Human Rights Record that relate to the Foreign Ministry. May I ask the Secretary, So how do you follow up with this piece of advice? Do you have any plans to amend 575? Let me clarify. This is just a special report for the UN that doesn't really speak for the UN as a whole. I'm talking about the expert from the UN Human Rights Council. Our definition of terrorism consists of 6 criminal acts. If you meet one of the definition, and also to try to compel the government or really for advancing a political, religious, or ideological cause that would constitute terrorism. Members should take note that of the 6 type of crimes we set out, and for the serious damage to property, we are just duplicating the UK counterterrorism laws. If you have any doubts, you should also question the UN anti-terrorism laws. Of course, I will also question the counterterrorism laws. Second, while there are frequent discussions at the UN, which of the acts are definitely terrorism acts? And those involving vandalizing property will cause serious damage, we will still see should be included. So a simple example, for the 11th of September, if there's no one at the World Trade Center and yes, both buildings collapsed, would that be not terrorism? When the property suffers serious damage, that would definitely be terrorist act. Thus, we see that our definition as appropriate. Dr. Chen Chung-tai, Chairman, according to the definition of terrorist attack, I believe that the most severe example for Hong Kong will be the 21st of July. Armed attacks on property, discriminate attack. And who were arrested? Well, you arrested a few dozens or so. On 28th of July in Nam Bin Wai, what have you placed in the village? We all know what's going on. And just now, Mr. Chu is just saying that they have 3 to learn for their 3 painful experience. Well, to Hong Kong people, July 21st is through awful experience. Awful. That was the most horrifying day. Well, after the Expedition Royal Revolt, and with just within a year, you talk about the showing signs of local terrorism. So you found a lot of firearms and bombs. May I ask the Bureau, have you had enough clues why you have this firearms and explosives circulating in the public? Is that these custom access failed to do this job? Or within the police force, there might be some bad apples or colluding with the triads so that there is so many of this circulating outside? Or secretary, they're all the department heads and chiefs and political appointed officials, while you claim the terrorism, that all the direct family members should cancel their foreign passport first. I suppose that the terrorism is on the rise, and yet you're not fit and proper yourself. Can you check the backgrounds of all the political appointed officials and department heads? And if anyone with a foreign background, you should renounce their foreign passport first. Would you consider taking this kind of action, and is it feasible? Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Well, for Hong Kong, we'll get to this mess. Well, and the background, and a lot of people for their own political gain or monetary gain to incite violence and to advocate mutual destruction. So we have seen on the firearms and explosives. First, a lot of people refuse to renounce violence and say no to violence, actually support and glorify and whitewash them, and at the same time describe them as romanticizing it, which will ruin people. Now that we have lost the bottom line, the younger generation have been used in violence clashes. Of those we arrested, 40% of them are students, 70% are secondary school students. Before they are fully mature, that who had the ulterior motive that would have destroyed the ship. Well, Dr. Junior So just arrive at the meeting hall. Your time is up. Next, Mr. Yu Shi-wing. Well, according to Secretary, they kept 575 and there are certain acts, including serious violence against a person, and causing serious damage to property, and endangering a person's life, and creating a serious risk to health and safety of the public. Altogether, 6 crimes will fall under Terrorist Act. And for the second half of last year, we have a series of violent protests. Quite apparently, that would meet the definition of Terrorist Act. As you mentioned in the paper, that you will look together with DOJ on invoking the counterterrorism laws for prosecute. Would anyone be prosecuted for committing terrorist acts? And in the future, we consider reviewing the prosecution threshold so as to create a stronger deterrent so people would not be tempted to break the law. Especially a lot of young people have been fooled by this romanticized acts and was on the brink of committing crimes. Before we institute any prosecution, we're based on evidence and facts. And the prosecution policy, the DOJ will take into account of a comprehensive basket of factors, and also that we need to have a reasonable chance of conviction. I believe that that's been a long-standing principle, and also the spirit of the rule of law. And I believe that we need to enhance the deterrence. Besides, on enforcement was that will rigorously uphold a law. The public awareness as a whole is important, and this is not something that the law enforcement department can do. The sense of law abidiness will actively through it, the media, and well, the social discussion and education, family working together, so that we can reinstitute the sense of legal compliance, so that we know there were consequences, and the criminal record will shatter our future, whether we come to it for a job and for study and for traveling. There will be huge obstacles. Well, we will work hard on the education, on enhancing deterrent. We see for serious offenses, we will publicize it. As for the court proceedings and ruling, we will also make aware of the judgment and our views, so we know the consequences of committing crimes. Next, Mr. Lok Jong-ho. Over the past year, the mutual destruction and civil unrest have turned into signs of local terrorism. For attacking pedestrians of different political views have been quite common, and we found that a lot of firearms besides rifles or even a sniper gun, and also tons of raw materials that could turn into explosive, and also there are thousands of fire bombs or cocktails. So it's apparently this is the signs of local terrorism. I'm been concerned about the source of this firearm. Where do they come from? I know that the secretary had claimed that these are assembled by parts. So where do the parts come from? And are the parts connected to the foreign forces to attempt to destabilize the government? And there is some concern, how do you determine a terrorist organization? Because we need to be compliant with the CAP 575. Would that be a loophole? If they're not following within the UN definition, for example, the Al Qaeda or ISIS, so this ordinance may not be applicable to them. How do we plug this loophole? there may be concerns that the government be so tough, like Donald Trump, just say something like Antifa. And civil rights for African American will claim that it's terrorism. Would they things swing to another extreme? Will that mechanism in place to determine whether on determining terrorist organizations? I already answered the question on terrorist organizations. I will supplement, but first I'll pass on to Mr. Cheuk-ting to talk about the firearms cases. On the source of firearms, in last December, the police have eradicated a violent syndicate, and for the first time they have seized a live firearm, and in other operations that other rioters have been shooting at the police. As of now, the police have seized 5 guns, which involve 1 AR-15 long-range rifle. Well, the bullets and the firearms, so where do they come from? I believe that they ordered overseas or online. Which country? U.S. Which including ordering the parts and assemble them on their own. Mr. Martin Liu. According to the explosives and raw material seized by the police, is undisputed that we're showing signs of local terrorism. That the police are working with the DOJ to prosecute the 3 explosive cases. And for this kind of explosive cases that you can prosecute through the UN, the Firearms and Ammunition Ordinance, or the United Nations Anti-Terrorism Ordinance. As also, when we decide to invoke the Crimes Ordinance or the UN ATMO, or what factors to consider. In UN ATMO, besides we set out clearly what constitute terrorist acts, that the UNAMT confers the power to freeze assets or to ban anyone to provide assistance and support to terrorists and the organizations. For the asset freezing, the Secretary of Security, when they suspect an individual or organization involved in terrorist activities, we can issue a warrant to freeze the assets. And then anyone providing support in form of assets and arranging training and for the journey to the training will also be illegal. In deciding to invoke which ordinance to prosecute, it depends on the applicability and the severity of the crime. If an individual, let's say it commit a terrorist act, for example, he murdered someone, then we can prosecute him for murder under crimes ordinance. At the same time, we can invoke the UNAMTO. Since it's an act of terrorism, let's say all elements, then we can freeze the assets. Or anyone providing assistance would also be prosecuted. And deciding to which law to invoke, besides looking at the act itself, I agree that we can use the crime ordinance, but also by the UNAMTMO to charge them those aiding and abetting, the accomplices, and also freezing assets to reduce the capabilities. And under the UNATMO, and also set out some offenses. And some of them are related to providing, supporting, especially for weapons or ammunitions.
If they provide the ammunition, then we would look at the applicability and the severity of the crime to see which ordinance we should invoke. Mr. Jimmy Ng, my question is related to Mr. Martin Liu's and Mr. Yu Si Wen's. We found that in the 6 months of social unrest last year, going by the definition of terrorist acts cited by the Secretary, then a lot of incidents fall under that definition. Say, for example, occupying the airport was disrupting the service of the airport, also damaging the MTR stations, and also hurling petrol bombs and vandalizing the shops, causing serious damage to property, etc. And with the intention to compel the government or intimidate the public for the purpose of advancing a political cause. Obviously, they have political causes to champion. So going by the definition, all these acts fall within the definition of terrorist acts, and there were indeed somebody behind them to plan these acts together with them. But then at public occasions, the police have never mentioned that these collective acts are terrorist acts or terrorist attacks. If I'm not mistaken, then will the police consider telling the public that if they collectively hurl petrol bombs, set fire to shops, occupy airports and railways, constitute an act of terrorism, so that the public can understand more? This is an educational initiative. Will the Secretary consider doing this? If they hurl petrol bombs, they will cause serious damage to property and endanger people's life. So that will fall under that definition. If they are also using this to compel the government, and they do it for advancing a political cause, then all these actually fall under the definition. But as to whether we should call that a terrorist act, it depends on whether we have sufficient evidence. Now, from what we see on TV, the first element was there. And for the second element, I believe that there was indeed such an element, but we do need the evidence. But for those who are engaging in this act, they know that they are doing this for a political cause, then they're already actually committing a terrorist act. Thank you, the member, for raising this. If you throw a petrol bomb to advance a political cause, it's already a terrorist act. Now, as to whether the police will invoke the relevant law, then it depends on whether we have sufficient evidence to prosecute you. But you know from the bottom of your heart that you are already engaging in a terrorist act. Dr. Fernando Zhang. Thank you, Chairman. Terrorist act targets mainly the civilian. Now, all over the world, people are resorting to violent acts to stir fear into civilians. The Secretary and the police said that we should not play down on violence, and I hope that you can also say no to violence. Breaking the law is breaking the law. If police break the law, then they should be deemed to be breaking the law. When you go online, click into any YouTube footage, you can see how police officers exercise violence, how they use the batons to hit people who are already subdued, and how they spray pepper spray to people who are already going away, and indiscriminately spraying the pepper spray at journalists. They on these violent acts. So should you say no to these violent clashes or violent acts as well? have you said no to violence of the Hong Kong people and violence of the police? Has any police officer been prosecuted for breaching your guidelines in using such violence and being prosecuted? Have you said no to all these? Secretary? Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Zhang is also saying something misleading. The police have been very stringent towards our police officers. For those breaching the law, we will take disciplinary action. Now, in the North District Hospital, a police officer was prosecuted for assaulting a person in the hospital. And yes, we did take our prosecution against police officers who breached the law. I think the Dr. Zhang is providing misleading information, leading people to think that the police would not be managing their police officers effectively. That is totally wrong. And then secondly, on TV screens or online, we see footages, but we have to see these footages in context. Under certain occasions, petrol bombs were hurled at police officers. Well, violence is violence, Chairman. Don't defend violence, glorify violence. Secretary, please continue. I think it's Dr. Fernando Zhang who glorifies or defends violence. Well, I am accusing you. As we all know, the police must exercise appropriate force to stop violence, or else we will not be able to save people who are subject to vigilante attacks. We have to exercise or use force to stop violence. I think it's a legal use of force on the part of the police. If people are unhappy with what the police have done, we do have a complaint mechanism to deal with the cases fairly and partially. And the police also have a mechanism to punish police officers who have breached the disciplinary guidelines. Mr. Rai Kwong, today we are discussing strengthening the prevention and tackling of terrorist activities. Well, I think this Lady 777 is also part of the terrorism scene in Hong Kong. Now, who are the real terrorists? Are those who are beating up the students? The secretary said that you would like to crack down terrorist acts. In your reply to Dr. Fernando Zhang, well, you sounded very combative. Now, I don't want to argue with you here. I've got only 3 minutes. In preventing terrorist activities, there was this message that the public security departments from mainland will be here to enforce the national security law. Does the public security department on the mainland, on the police, have greater power? I don't think this question is meaningful. Why? Why is that not meaningful? When we talk about terrorism, now we are talking about the state organs, the national security law. My question has been very clear. Do you think the public security department on the mainland or the Hong Kong police have greater power? Secretary, any law enforcement agencies will enforce the law in accordance with the relevant laws. Who is more powerful? I think the secretary has answered your question. Any further reply from the secretary? I have answered that question, and also I think the question is asked without any good basis. I think you're here today to argue with us. I try to be calm in the first 2 minutes. You, as a Secretary for Security, would like to prevent terrorism, but then if the public security department on the mainland is here in Hong Kong, I mean, do they have the greatest say or the police have the greatest say? Please respect the questions of the members. I've asked 4 times my question. Well, you can answer that. Well, it depends. They will mutually respect each other. Aren't you prepared for this question or what? Secretary, we will discharge our own duties in our own portfolios, respectively. Mr. Siu Ka-chun. Thank you, Chairman. To stop untrue news circulating, the United Nations rapporteurs said that in relation to CAP 57, they think that our definition is too broad here, and it departs from the UN's definition, and the definition or the ordinance is unclear, and the country should not, in the name of safeguarding national security, oppress the public and oppress those who are dissidents. The Secretary for Security has prepared a line to take, and that is not to glorify or play down terrorist acts. But then let's be careful not to misjudge such terrorist acts. On the May the 17th, Wang Tai-sin Temple, a suspicious object was discovered, and 100 people were evacuated, and the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Bureau personnel were deployed, and a robot was deployed to deal with it, and firemen were called in as well. And ultimately found that it was a device put there by the university to gather data. And actually, the device came with a very clear label that this was the object of a university. A logo was there, a contact telephone number was put there for people to inquire. And there was no inquiry made, and as a result, much was being done. Since you've established the ICTU, does this ICTU teach police officers to deal with cases calmly, reasonably? And they should not, on the sight of a suspicious object, draw things out of proportion and think that they are dangerous explosives. I'm talking about the training for police officers. Can you elaborate on that? Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. In handling explosives, we adopt a prudent approach because the damage could be very serious. For those who try to create panic, that we should warn them, then they should be mindful of the consequences of their own behavior. We've got over 10 cases or so on explosives and firearms, and there are signs of the breeding of local terrorism in Hong Kong. Now, if you are doing something without, say, at a place without the consent of the landowner, you should review your act. Are you saying that the university is creating panic here? Well, please let the secretary finish. If his act creates a certain panic, now he should be well aware that this might be so, and this is very important. If the police do not take a prudent approach in dealing with suspicious objects, and ultimately it is a real bomb, should Mr. Xiu Yu be held responsible?
Well, for bomb discovery, we'll check against you. I'm talking about on 17th of May. I'm talking about the Wang Tai-sin Temple incident. Well, I think that is that university creating panic. So why are we asking a legislator to be held accountable? I noticed the personnel concerned have apologized. I noticed that the testing instrument at the Wang Tai-sin Temple have failed to inform the temple himself. Mr. LAM Cheuk-ting, Speaking of counterterrorism, the force were claimed it would stop the violence and chaos. So the Party Secretary of Public Security Bureau, Mr. Cheuk Ka-ki, and will direct and support the Hong Kong Police Force to end the chaos and violence. So may I ask the Secretary, how did the police force receive directions from the Public Security Bureau? Well, the Public Security Bureau is most famous for cracking down on these secessionist activities in Xinjiang, including the re-education camps, or those for the Uyghurs are restricted measures, and that were condemned by the global community for the trampling of human rights and the trampling of personal freedoms. Now that the Public Security Ministry would instruct the Hong Kong Police Force that the police force will need to go to Xinjiang re-education camp to learn from the Public Security Bureau strategy. As for the measures implemented in Xinjiang that cited by the members, he already had a position in believing the accusations made by foreign countries. The central government had already explained policies that I disagree with his viewpoint. On counterterrorism, or whereas the national security is concerned, the Public Security Bureau is definitely more experienced than us. We can see they had a more severe terrorism situation, and the terrorist attack happened quite some time ago. Hong Kong used to be the safest city in the world because we are a force for maintaining peace and order. If we can enhance our knowledge and experience and also learn from other departments on how to crack down on terrorism, I believe they only be beneficial. May I ask the Secretary that the mainland public security officers, while they have a terrible record on human rights abuses, a lot of the activists and dissidents and the activist lawyers and have their freedom trampled by the national security and public security officials. And if the Hong Kong police would also learn these human rights abuses which affect our human rights and liberties. First, I will not tend to respond to the members' political propaganda. For any Hong Kong law enforcement agency, they must act in accordance with Hong Kong law. Thus, we should execute our duties in accordance with the law. Next, Dr. KWOK. So most recently, there are quite a series of bizarre incidents. First, in the Kwai Chung police station, the hurling of petrol bombs, or the policeman was suspect of obstructing justice. And for the weapons seized, including in Choi Shek Lane, Choi Hong, where the firearms and explosives seized become a dead-end cases. As we recall, for example, the Luko Chiao, that it was simply fabricated. Well, of course, we've said no to terrorism. And last year, I believe the overarching force of the police and also excessive force by the police that battered a lot of protesters. And the 23rd of April, the UN experts have written to China to follow up on the UN ATMO and the sedition offenses. While the Hong Kong counterterrorism, the definition of terrorism is imprecise and is inconsistent with the right of the freedom of association as stipulated in the ICCPR, and on the pretext of cracking on terrorism, to crack down on civil rights, had the attention of UN experts. And in the letter, they urged the government to wrap the definition that comply with the UN definition and urged the government to respond. I noticed the government has not replied. Would the government wouldn't dare to reply, or according to your expert, you are using the counterterrorism as the excuse to limit the civil rights under the ICCPR? Why did the government fail to respond to the letter? What you cited, we called the UN rapporteurs will made a reply to UN through the China Foreign Ministry that this special rapporteur only speak on a personal capacity and which table to the UN, which we discussed there. This doesn't represent the position of the UN. Under UN ATMO, if you read the offences carefully, 5 of those were copied word by word from the UK legislation. And of the one aspect cited by the special rapporteur, what involving the causing serious damage to property, should be deleted. It claims that the UK legislation which you copy from would have the same problem. A serious damage to property would constitute an act that we should be targeted. I cite the example of September 11th. If the World Trade Center was vacant and yet still collapsing, but it's still not terrorism, I believe no one would accept this. Of the 6 crimes we list out, this number 6, a copy from Canadian law. While legislating, we have taken into account the similar provisions in common law jurisdictions. So with 5 parts altogether, a copy from UK and 1 part of which from the Canadian law. Thank you. Chairman. Well, the judgment made on this close cases. Well, this question be raised by other colleagues and been answered, and you have overrun it by 90 seconds. Mr. Wuchiwai, well, my colleague may have raised that before me. On 21st of April, in Kwai Chung Police Station, which a police sergeant have planted a case of obstruction of justice, and the 8th of May, the tribe policemen have stolen 18 million worth of drugs and a breach of public officer conduct. And this year, we see the police reputation is sinking by the day. You can see close to 50% of the Hong Kong people in the opinion poll have shown the lack of trust towards the police. Well, police as the enforcement agency for the UN ATMO, and yet we are seeing incidents like this. May I ask the Secretary, have you take a hard look at whether that the breed of local terrorism actually happened in the police force itself by planting evidence is really discrediting the public dissatisfaction of the government. When some in the police force have tried to pervert the course of justice by planting an evidence, would you consider that as incite as others to, as the basis, commit terrorism acts? Or what would you do? Or we try to resolve this by internal disciplinary hearing? And thirdly, that would everyone be under the ambit of UN AMTO, if someone in the force have breach the UNAMTO, who will be the enforcers in this case? I'll offer a consolidated response. Then I'll pass on to Mr. Hsu. Everyone is equal before the law. Thus, Hong Kong the law applicable to everyone. And all law enforcement officers and legislators and everyone present. I believe that this very solemn question of counterterrorism has been taken on a tangent, or for example, case of explosives and firearms cases. Well, the law enforcement agency expect to have a strict discipline. If we find a breach with discipline, it also should be a sanctioned. And well, there will be disciplinary action for any officers. And I'll just cite examples on multiple occasions that the police will pursue them rigorously with the law. I'm asking in the context of the UNAMTO, if the police or the lawbreakers themselves, or in breach of the UNAMTO, who can enforce the law in this case? For any officers in breach of the regulations and the law, in assuming cases, the police must follow the law and taking disciplinary action. Of the cases you cited, and we have taken the legal revenue and prosecute those involved. Under our legal system, the law enforcement agency, besides the immigration and custom excise and ICAC, then all other law enforcement agencies would have the same powers. I have 5 others who would like to speak. I received 2 ad hoc motions from Mr. Horace Chung and Mr. Dennis Kwok. And after we finish the questions, and we might deal with them in the order I received, and we might have to put this to a vote. As Elizabeth Kwok, today we deal with serious matter, and how do we crack down on terrorism? As we heard, the opposition camp, and they seems to claim that just causing serious property damage without a homicide wouldn't count as terrorism. Maybe they were thinking on how to placate the rioters' support by vandalizing the shops or even setting people on fire, or not terrorism, hoping to acquit them. I'm quite worried that the local terrorism is getting more blatant. We can see there are more bombs. And for the mutual destruction camp, politicians can advocating, claiming that serving prison time would make your life more colorful. By glorifying them as hero acts would incite more young people to take part in local terrorism. By hurling petrol bombs and bomb making are extremely dangerous. And some judges also claim that the young children hurling petrol bombs are top-notch talent and truly love Hong Kong. They will mislead the young people or those underage in breaking the law and take part in this terrorist acts.
Recently, someone told me, a parent told me, and he is very worried because online there are messages saying that since you are not an adult, you don't have to be worried about hurling petrol bombs because you don't go to jail by doing this. Now, after that, the judge actually ruled that this young person do not have to go to jail. So he's very worried. But even if you are an adult, you would just spend 2 months in prison. Well, just treat it as a summer breakaway. So all these comments will mislead young people into thinking that there is no price to pay. They don't have to go to jail. So there's no problem hurling petrol bombs. So I think the government must do several things going forward. First is to how to assist in implementing the national security law, and also enhance the ICTU so that they can work together with the authorities in implementing the national security law. So for people advocating independence of Hong Kong, and I think you should strengthen your intelligence gathering work. And also young people are not very law-abiding these days. So more public education on that front should be conducted among the young people. I think the Secretary has heard your views. Thank you. Deputy Chairman, today we're talking about strengthening the prevention and tackling of terrorist activities. The Secretary has given a definition of terrorist acts. I think the definition is clear. It talks about causing serious violence against a person, causing serious damage to property, endanger a person's life, creating a serious risk to the health and safety of the public, and seriously interfering with an electronic system. There have been months of black violence in the past. Last year, there have been hurling of petrol bombs, vandalizing police properties and lampposts. Without a doubt, these are terrorist acts. And the Secretary said that you must curb these and combat them vigorously under the law. I have a question of why you don't have sufficient evidence to prosecute people under the UNATMO. If we take people to the court, that will serve very well as an education tool. If the DOJ and the police do not invoke UNATMO, but rather invoke other laws to prosecute people, then the police determination to crack down on terror acts be undermined. So people will not be given a clear message that this is a terrorist act. And people have been incited online to do violent acts. Last week, I received this message. The young people are being incited to do cover-ups. They are glorifying such acts. So are these inciting comments considered terrorist acts? And how serious is the terrorist threat level of Hong Kong is? You say it's moderate, but are we really, should the threat level be serious? Have foreign powers been infiltrating into Hong Kong to work together with local forces to engage in these acts? Deputy Chairman, I have referred to several elements in terrorist acts. If somebody commits a crime which falls under the 6 categories that I mentioned, and they do so to compel the government of advancing a political or religious cause, if the person meets these 3 criteria, then such act is considered terrorist act under our law. But then we do have to have together sufficient evidence to prove that the 3 elements are there. It's just like a robbery case. Somebody has robbed A or has robbed B, then we must have evidence to show that this is the case. So this is our objective, but we need the evidence to do prosecution. I agree that we should invoke an ordinance to prosecute, not just for serving as deterrent, but also it can also serve as an education purpose. So we hope the society can understand that there are signs of breeding of local terrorism. Now, of course, it would be better if we have court cases. We are working hard on that, and somebody has been prosecuted, and during the trials, then we hope that more explanation can be given as to what acts will fall under the definition. Dr. Helena Wong, the Secretary, refers to local terrorism threat as at a moderate level. We don't know the criteria you go by. Can you give the legislators the relevant standards, i.e. under what circumstances would the threat level be considered as low or moderate? Now, you said that since July last year, there were 10 cases involving explosives and firearms, and this is a basis on which you say that there is breeding of local terrorism. You said that you are investigating into the cases. What is the progress of your investigation? Have you arrested anyone or any organizations which can show that these acts are related to terrorism? Do you have sufficient evidence, or have you arrested anyone? You also said that apart from the UNATMO, which can be used to prosecute people, the crimes ordinance or existing ordinances can also be invoked. Now, you have arrested someone. Would you be prosecuting the person under UNATMO or crimes ordinance? What is the guiding principle for you in invoking a specific law? Let me answer the second question first. As to which ordinance to evoke, we would be mindful about the applicability and the severity of the crime. If we can, my principle all along is to invoke UNATMO to highlight the severity of the crime. But we must gather the relevant facts and evidence in order to do so. Well, our starting point is to invoke the most severe ordinance. Well, can I defer to Mr. Siu to talk about the specific cases? The first question has been raised by another legislator. Let me repeat. Among the 18 cases, 14 are related to bombs and 4 are related to genuine guns. And we've arrested a total of 76 people, among whom 30 have been prosecuted for various crimes. Of the 18 cases, at least 7 radical groups, local groups, have been involved. We will continue to study with the DOJ as to whether we can invoke UNATMO to initiate prosecutions. Let me extend the meeting till 4:30 p.m. Dr. Priscilla Lam, last year I discussed with different secondary school students the incidents last year. Some students told me that they've ordered the full gear with the assistance of their friends who studied in America. They did the coordinating work. The person actually hasn't returned to Hong Kong, but since the internet has been developing so well, so they've been liaising with their secondary school student classmates who have gone overseas to study. And recently, you've discovered cases involving explosives and firearms, and also involving underage secondary school students. Would you work with the EDB on promoting CT education in secondary schools? And also, would you be considering on how to stop cross-border messages inciting people to buy firearms and so on, and the person who is the buyer is safe because the seller is overseas? So do you have such information? A secondary school student actually told me this. So how can you sort of enhance the so-called immunity of secondary school students against such incitement? Thank you, the member, for raising this question. From June last year up to now, the ratio of young people being arrested has been increasing incessantly. We originally started with under 10%, and now 40% of those arrested are secondary or young people, and among them 70% are secondary school students. So people involved in these illegal acts are getting younger and younger, and this is most disheartening. We talked about how we should do more education. I think what matters most is to foster a culture of law-abidiness among the society. I think every sector of the society has a part to play. And another member also asked us to consider to do more work at schools. Thank you for the opinion. We will work together with the EDB and schools on this. Let me raise one more point. The person in Hong Kong orders the firearms from their classmates who have gone overseas to study. So that's very clear. So, well, I'll finish. I will deal with the two motions after Mr. Eddie G has spoken. I would like to follow up on Mr. Lam Cheuk-ting's question. In December 2018, the Undersecretary for Security, Mr. Sonny Au, was said to have visited Xinjiang to understand the CT work there. In newspaper interviews and also your speeches just then, the Secretary, you seem to be affirming the CT work of the mainland, and Mr. Raymond Chan and other legislators have written in January 2019 to the Security Panel and the administration. We said that since the administration found that the CT work on the mainland was good, and you said that many overseas media reports were in fact biased. So why can't you organize visit for the legislators to Xinjiang? We have now the UNATMO, and there is also a terrorist activity part in the national security law. So definitely you are going to introduce the approach from the mainland to Hong Kong. Secondly, I've read some reports about Xinjiang. When CT work is going on in Xinjiang, a major part has to do with the monitoring of electronic devices, and they also adopt the facial recognition technology. It's very powerful. And your location is known all the time. So you would like to strengthen or beef up your work in this area. Would you also model after Xinjiang and introduce something that's being done in Xinjiang to Hong Kong?
Secretary, without the counterterrorism effort that it's been an established practice for us to have exchange with various counterterrorism agencies overseas. We've been to the Western countries and Southeast Asian countries, and also we'll conduct visits in the mainland. I believe that each region have their own deployment in response to their respective condition, which I see as worthy of learning from, as they all have their unique circumstances and a varying extent. And for the counterterrorism efforts in the mainland, first we'd like to find out how do they conduct intelligence analysis and also on their preparedness and contingency plan, and how they allow the agency responsible to act swiftly. Well, I see the Secretary have answered the question. Well, you claim that you don't want to take it to Xinjiang, you can take us somewhere else. Well, you see, elect you as an important public body. So, well, the panel decide where we go for duty visit instead of administration. If we're seen, would you consider introducing the electronic surveillance like they do in Xinjiang? Our investigation and intelligence gathering was to follow the Hong Kong laws and the legally permitted mechanism. Dear colleagues, I need to deal with two motions. First, I'll deal with Mr. Dennis Kwok motions, followed by Mr. Horace Cheuk. I see that we had a quorum. First, I would like the Dennis Kwok to move his motion. Well, actually, it's been projected on the screen for you. I suppose you can put it right way. Can I read it aloud? I don't think it's needed. Everyone can see. We usually read it out. All right. The 6th UN Special Rapporteur have written on 23rd of April 2020, pointed at the UTN ATMO sedition offenses involve multiple human rights loopholes, suggest the government to review and amend the legislation. The special rapporteur suggested they can ensure they could review and amend the laws to make sure they comply with human rights standards and provide technical assistance. This panel requests the Hong government to have a holistic review and amend the relevant statute to comply with human rights standards, and also accept the technical assistance from the UN Special Rapporteur. How about this? I suppose that you will like to claim division. So we had a quorum. So let's just do it by show of hands. If the members would like to ring a 5-minute bell, they'll take 10 minutes for 2 motions. Do we agree? Oh, you can press the button. Do you want to claim division? All right. Okay, voting begins. And please press the present button and then choose for or against. Have all cast your vote? So have all voted? Before I announce the results, the members please check your votes. Voting has stopped. Please show the results. Already announced, voting has stopped. 21 present, 9 for, 11 against. I declare that the motion defeated. Next, we deal with the Mr. Horace Cheung's motion, and seconded by Ms. Elizabeth Kwok. Mr. Cheung, can you read it out? Well, since the eruption of the anti-extradition protest, there are signs that showing that local terrorism is taking root in Hong Kong. We noticed that the NPC Senate Committee will legislate on the Hong Kong SAR national security laws as covered the acts of terrorism act. We urge the administration to fully work with the UN PCN Committee to take effective measures to prevent, crackdown, and sanction the terrorist acts stemmed from the anti-extradition riots. Mr. Lam Cheuk-ting, what's wrong? I noticed that Ms. Andrew Lam had made a ruling that decided that the Mr. Wu's question at the council is out of order, and cited claimed it's a national legislation exercise that's beyond, and it's not the related to the Hong Kong legislative exercise. And how is your motion mentioned asking the administration to work with the NPC Standing Committee legislative exercise? I wonder, is that not in line with the President's ruling? I'd like to listen by the motion mover, then I'll make a ruling. Well, Mr. Lau had when legislating, I'm urging the administration, which means the authorities, not about the nation at the NPC Standing Committee. Of course, I know when we're talking about when I approve those motions, I discussed with the secretary and the deputy chairman would see it as admissible and also in line with today's item. And now would put Mr. Chang's motion to a vote, and please press the present button and then vote and for or against. Let everyone cast their vote. Let's wait for Ms. Claudia Mo first. This is also a division. While nobody asked for the bell. So have you cast your vote? Please check your vote, and voting has stopped to show the results. 30 present, 15 for, 14 against. We decide the motion is carried. So that's conclude this item. And now we move on to the next item, that the work progress and planning of the ICACs for year 2020 to 2021. For members who would like to speak, please press your button. Well, today we have ICAC Commissioner Mr. Simon Pei, Head of Operations Mr. Ricky Yao, Director of Community Relations Mr. Ho Wai Chi, and Director of Corruption Prevention Mr. Joe Lee, and Assistant Director Administration Mrs. Sally Kwan. Before we start, we have the Commissioner to walk us through the report, and we'll open the floor to questions. I see there are 6 members who would like to speak, as well 3 minutes per round. Commissioner, please. I would like to give you some key highlights of our major initiatives. First, I would like to talk about the corruption scene for 2019 and the first quarter of 2020. And the second half of 2019, we have this social unrest, and earlier this year, we have this COVID-19 pandemic, which brings unprecedented challenges. In spite of this, the ICAC steadfastly committed to anti-graft mission, and with unwavering determination and state commitment to professionalism in pursuing all corruption complaints, and also investigate each pursuable complaints, and continue to promote extensive and in-depth corruption prevention and education work. And I would like to talk about the corruption scene in 2019 and first quarter of 2020. And in 2019, we have received 14% less corruption complaints, excluding election-related complaints. And each different sectors have noticed a significant drop. And the private sector complaints is more significant, while the distribution complaints are similar. For those involving the private sector, bureau departments and public bodies are made up of about 64%, 28%, and 7% respectively. In 2019, 134 persons were prosecuted in 86 cases, excluding election-related cases. And for conviction rate, the case-based and person-based conviction rates were at 79% and 75% respectively. As the first 4 months in 2020, we have received 578 non-election related complaints, a year-on-year drop of 20%, and the pursuable complaint dropped by 17%. The decrease mainly attributed to the private sector. And in 2019 and first quarter this year, they received 623 election-related complaints and 129 respectively as of the end of April this year. And complaints involving 2019 DC elections stands at 644. And based on intelligence and analysis, Hong Kong corruption seems to continue to be under control. Over 70% of the complainants are willing to file a complaint in a personal capacity, showing that have confidence in the ICAC professional enforcement. And now I would like to outline our work major initiatives. Public officers will continue to step up the training on officers, civil servant and public officers to let them heighten their vigilance to avoid the breach of corruption-related crimes, and to draft anti-corruption guidelines, as well as provide best practices for different work procedures. The SCAC will continue to allocate resources to deal with operation effort on areas of public concern and public safety, as well as issues involving substantial sum of money. And the government ICAC continue to for active early prevention input in government's formation, new policies, and related operation system initiatives and projects. And with also that we will assist development bureau and public works body enhance their system for supervision and works project, ensure that corruption is system. We will also have a new supervision work site supervision systems for public work project and use of digital technology in underway. And we'll also enhance the country awareness and capabilities in equity management and corruption prevention. The ICU will remain alert to corruption opportunities arising from Operation Building Bright, Fire Safety Improvement Work Subsidy Scheme, Lift Modernization Subsidy Scheme. The ICU make work reviews, corruption scene, and formulate holistic strategy to deal with the problems. To sustain Hong Kong status as an international financial center, ICUs continue to fight corruption and other graft-facilitated illicit activities. And we have signed a memorandum of understanding with the SFC to combat corruption and market malpractice. And the ICAC and Insurance Authority, and earlier this year, have jointly launched the Ethics Promotion for the Insurance Industry to provide anti-corruption resources and training materials for the industry, and develop a corruption prevention guide for use by insurance company. And for the election, arrangements for last year's district council election, the ICAC had reviewed the counting and voting procedures, and based on the outcome, we have proposed a series of recommendations, as well on enhancing the voting and counting procedures. The ICAC will strengthen power to take prompt and robust enforcement actions against electoral corruption and malpractice, and organizing a series of education and publicity activities to promote clean and fair election message for the coming legislative election. To promote positive values in the younger generation, we'll start an effort in the launch of the Reading for Integrity project, with promote positive values in primary school students and teachers, and also launched a Youth for Youth co-creation project by engaging young people to develop creative production to enforce the core values of integrity and rule of law, and enhance positive engagement of young people on various media platforms, including especially social media.
The ICAC will continue to promote collaboration exchanges with anti-graft authorities internationally and on the mainland. Despite the epidemic in different countries, we will continue to liaise with the state parties under the UN Convention Against Corruption. And after the epidemic is over, we will restart corruption prevention training programs. And based on the outlined development plan for the Guangdong Hong Kong Macau GBA, we will continue to step up our collaboration with anti-graft authorities in the GBA and achieve synergy. No matter what circumstances we are in, the ICAC will adopt a three-pronged approach comprising law enforcement, public education, and corruption prevention. We will strive to uphold a clean and fair environment in Hong Kong, and through various channels, we will introduce to the international community Hong Kong's work and achievements in fighting corruption. We will continue to promote Hong Kong's advantages in having a clean environment and integrity system and a solid foundation of the rule of law. We have Mr. Eddie Hon LAM Cheuk-ting, Running Champion Siu Ping, Siu Carton, and Dr. KWOK. So I'll draw a line after that. Mr. Eddie Ju, 3 minutes, including questions and answers. Thank you, Chairman. 2 simple questions. First, in the July 21st Yuen Long incident, there are media reports saying that the ICAC will take the initiative to investigate whether police officers are engaged in misconduct in public office. It's been 1 year has lapsed. The IPCC's 1,000-page report has been released, and they have their own view on that incident. Has the ICAC finished the investigation? If yes, would you make public your decisions? Second, is about the electrical. Several years ago, a former legislator, Lam Kwok did not declare that he has received $250,000, and he was prosecuted for misconduct in public office, and he was absolved ultimately. And there was another incident in the electrical. Mr. Jonathan Ho, our colleague, last Saturday, all of a sudden became the Undersecretary for Labor and Welfare. In some interview reports, we saw that during his service as electrical, Mr. Ho knew that he would be appointed as the Undersecretary, but he never declared that. So, Commissioner, this is one case. I'm not going to ask you to comment on it. That would be similar incidents again in the future. I believe that they will invite legislators to become secretaries, undersecretaries, etc. So from the ICAC perspective, once we received such invitation, should we declare the same to the electrical so that we will not be caught inadvertently by the law? Mr. Ricky Yap. Thank you, Mr. Ju, for your question. Let me clarify one point. ICAC said openly that we have received complaints relating to the July 21st, and we are seriously following up on the case. For confidentiality's sake, we will not comment on the incident. All investigations will be conducted independently, fairly, impartially, and professionally. At this stage, if we have embarked on investigation, we're not in position to comment on the case because nobody will know how the developments will be like. That's my answer. Any supplement on the question about Jonathan Ho? Now, if any legislator receives an invitation to join the government, how should we deal with it? We will not comment on individual cases. There is a possibility that ICAC will receive complaints on any one incident in the society, so we will not comment on any single case. Now, any public officers, including legislators and other public officers, in handling their public their duties, they have to be extra careful if they don't understand certain matters. They should seek their views from their own legal advisors so they will not break the law. Mr. Lam Cheuk-ting, one of the duties of the ICAC is to help the government monitor civil servants and see whether there are corruption practices, and a report has to be made to the CE. Recommendations have to be made. Chairman, we noticed that there has been grave misconduct on the part of the police officers. It's very staggering. Even the police commissioner finds it very surprising. The West Kowloon anti-triad team was investigating into a drug case, and a police officer stole 60 pounds of ice, and he was arrested by his peers. This is the tip of the iceberg. The police said that it will set up an integrity team to look at the conduct of the police officers. They are suggesting that the police officers should be tested for whether they are abusing drugs on a mandatory basis. So is it the case that the drug abuse problem among police officers is very serious, and that's why they've come up with this idea of mandatory drug abuse testing for police officers? Well, this, not to mention there are also other cases about perverting the course of justice and so on. So the corrupt behavior of the police force is very staggering. Mr. Yao, for the decadent behavior among police officers recently, have you noticed it? And have you made recommendations to the CE on how to stop such corrupt practices? Who to take the question? As I said in the beginning, the Hong Kong police, the Hong Kong civil servants and public officers generally are quite clean in a sense, and the police force is also a clean force. But even the police commissioner said that he is astonished at the conduct of police officers. The crime prevention and the community relations departments have taken part in the steering committee. Can I defer to Mr. Yao for elaborating the details? Like the commissioner pointed out, we've been watching over the corrupt situation in the police force. We have, in the operations department, there is a dedicated team to investigate into police officers' corrupt behavior. For the past several years, on average, 3 to 4 police officers were prosecuted by the ICAC. Of course, one case is too many. We are watching closely the corrupt situation of the police force. Will follow up duly. Mr. Ronnie Chan, let me declare that I am a member of the Operations Review Committee and also a committee relating to the witnesses. In May, the ICAC has completed reviews on 2 innovation and technology-related initiatives under the Science Park and the ITC. The government has encouraged tenders to incorporate technology and innovation elements in their tenders. It's difficult to quantify such elements, and it's difficult to give them a score. And how would you assess the effectiveness of such anti-corruption work? The commissioner said at the outset that the ICAC and Development Bureau are adopting a integrity management system, and it is now consulting the sector as to whether the IMS should be incorporated into the decision of including public works contractors into the approved list. How can the ICAC convince the trade to adopt such IMS to achieve a higher standard of probity? Mr. Lee, in terms of procurement, innovation element is to be included. That was implemented last year. The Crime Prevention Department has given the government a lot of advice on this. And we said that they should issue more guidelines in that front. The government has heeded our views and issued guidelines for reference by different departments on how to assess the INT element in the procurement process. It might not be easy for us to come up with hot targets. I think we should do it through training and the relevant government departments in INT field should provide advice to other government departments on how to better leverage on INT. We will continue to provide advice to the government departments concerned. And if they are going to implement the procurement policy incorporating INT, then we would provide them with advice, and we welcome inquiries from them. I will extend the meeting time for another 15 minutes so that the three members outstanding can also ask the question. Mr. Poon Siu Ping, you said the overall pattern in terms of the different sectors being complained against are similar, and 64% of the complaints concern the private sector, 28% relate to government departments, 7% involve public bodies. I would like to ask a question about the 28% relating to government departments. Which government departments or civil servants are you talking about? And what about the conviction rate? In the past, the ICAC has helped issue guidelines and conducted training for government departments. Which government departments have been complained against most? Do you have any guidelines for them? I think it's important that we have a clean civil service team. Let me take the second question first. We will keep close tabs on the number of complaints against different government departments, and whether we prosecute or not, we will refer the relevant cases to the government departments to perhaps carry out a disciplinary action further. And if needed, the Corruption Prevention Department can strengthen liaison with different government departments. And if education and publicity are needed, the Community Relations Department can also pitch in to help with doing more public education and publicity work. Can I defer to Mr. Yao about the government departments which receive the most complaints? Thank you, Mr. Poon, for your question. At the FC special meeting, number 5332, we have given you detailed information on the number of complaints against government departments in the past 5 years. The answer carries all these figures, but I would like to say here that the pattern is quite similar over the past years. Government departments who interact more frequently with members of the public would receive relatively more complaints.
The top three, police force at MBHT and also housing department, as the establishment is quite large and also frequent contact with the public. So their work would easily drew the public discontent and arouse suspicion of corruption. Over the past few years, for the corruption-related and also successful prosecutions, over the 5 years at around 10 to 16 per year. Mr. Chiu Ka-chun, I'd like to follow up to Mr. Poon's question Mr. Poon's question was related to complaints related to civil service. As for the misconduct in public office, from what I know, that this offense referred to the public office in the course of their duty on the act of omission and create learning amid certain acts, for example, a neglect or not fulfilling the role without a reasonable explanation or justification. Over the past year, how many civil servants have been reported for misconduct in public office? How many be investigated and how many will be prosecuted? You cited the police, FPHD, and housing department. Can you give us a simple breakdown, or you can supplement it in writing? Thank you, Mr. Hsu. Question. I don't have the data at hand, but I can supplement you later. I would like to take the chance to explain that the misconduct public office is a common law offense that is not even written in the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance. The law enforcement agency, besides the ICAC, police can also enforce the law too. From our experience, why do you notice that in the media that for the MIPC, we always start with a corruption charge, and in the course of investigating or gathering evidence, we're not able to prove corruption, and yet the acts committed met the definition of misconduct in public office. Thus, the DOJ would decide to charge under that offense. As for the date you request, I will supplement you after the writing. Thank you. Last, Dr. Ki Kwok. Chairman, I recall there's an old saying goes, and well, Hong Kong is proud of having ICAC. After hearing from Mr. Simon Pei, you claim that the corruption scene at the police force is not severe. I have great reservations and shock. Over the past year, well, the appearance of corruption, let me quote the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index from in 2010 at 84, and 2019 only has 76. So to the eyes of foreigners and locals, a Hong Kong corruption scene is deteriorating, while the perception is reality in this case. Speaking of corruption figures, you claim that the numbers may not be significant, while the police corruption also involving the misconduct of those and higher-ups and misconduct, they have caused a big hit in our anti-corruption awareness. May I ask the Commissioner again, do you really think that we're doing okay with corruption, and that the police do not warrant special attention from the ICAC? Besides the police commissioner, you'll be the second head of department that regarded as a condoning or tacitly allowing the aggravating of misconduct and corruption. As for the Transparency International score, well, a few years ago, they have modified their methodology. Well, it's just simply quoting 2019 compared to 2019. That will be not a fair comparison. In terms of ranking, they surveyed 180 countries. Hong Kong has always been in the top 20. So in top 20, according to TI, they will see the cleanest group of countries. The Hong Kong's ranking has always been high. In 2019, out of 180 countries, we're at 16, which was quite high. Thus, our international reputation including our property, enjoy a high global reputation, which I wish to clarify. As for the corruption at the police force, well, KWOK may not remember, back in the 60s and the 70s, I welcome you to the ICAC headquarters where we have an exhibition hall. We can show you some old clips for comparison, comparing yesterday to today. Like I said, Hong Kong society has been clean and honest, and Hong Kong civil servants as well, including the police force, have always been very clean as well. Chairman, he failed to answer my question. I'm not finished yet. I stated clearly, well, you are the second officer after the police commissioner, and condone even admit that the corruption at the police are not worthy of concern. That's quite serious. As a ICAC commissioner, for you to make this judgment, I would question you whether you had created the impression that you would disregard the corruption and the police force. I would be acting impartially. Well, we're using the corruption complaints and also our investigation findings and also our intelligence gathering. So we've been saying this objectively. So all the members have asked a question. Let's conclude this item. As to the last item, AOB, nothing under AOB. The meeting adjourned. Thank you to the Commissioner and the colleagues for coming.